going to challenge something that most education founders believe to be true within the alternative education movement. Word of mouth, it's not working as great as you think it is. And you might immediately challenge me, mentioning all the parents who say that they love you, not only to you, but also publicly, whether it is on soccer practice, whether it's online, or whether it's in conversations that you ask them to join with prospects that just want to talk to a parent within your school. And the reason why this great results or this great outcomes that every single school might be happy to have is not as great as you think it may be is because you see the wins, but you don't see all the dozens, hundreds, perhaps thousands of conversations that happen in which a parent of yours is trying to explain your company and your values to someone else, and that other family is just not. Today, I'm gonna go very quickly over where word of mouth usually breaks within alternative education schools, but also how to make it consistent, being one of the best channels when it comes to low customer acquisition cost and higher retention, because now you have a friend of a friend of a friend join in, and who wants to leave whenever you have people like you getting also benefits who you can share an experience with. First, let's paint the picture of how most word of mouth conversations usually go. Let's say you have a parent called Maria. Maria has attended your school for a year and totally loves it. Maria is talking to Mario. Mario is a friend of hers. He has a child who also fits the kind of characteristics that make for a great experience within your school. So we'll call Mario someone who is a qualified family. Maria might be talking to Mario and hear Mario say something like, hey, I'm so stressed about the amount of homework that my kid has to deal with. And Maria, she might hear this and say, well, my school seems to be giving kids a lot of meaningful homework. Why don't I tell Mario about it? So she might go over the fact that maybe there's less homework. Mario might listen to all that story and ask himself, what do you mean that children do not have homework within your school? That sounds like I'm just paying them and not getting extra hours that I would get in a traditional school. Mario might say, my kid wants to be an entrepreneur and creatives are pretty lazy. And it may be the case that within your school, you don't have homework precisely because everything happens within the school. Or maybe you have AI models that are able to really shrink the amount of time that a child has to spend to learn something, freeing up a bunch of time that they can use for something else. But what's happening is that Maria doesn't have all that context, or she doesn't have the words to be able to articulate it. She's not a salesperson. Why would she know the kind of words that are necessary to highlight within your school? Why would she go into examples and clarity and specificity? She's just a mom, and she's a mom who is actually engaging in an act of word of mouth, but that of course has no incentive to be trained towards just pitching you. And of course, I don't have to tell you how this goes, which is that Mario listens to all of that, also nods politely, and then, he just keeps on going with the same school that he's been going to, or perhaps just with an alternative that is better at explaining itself. So how do you overcome this? How do you overcome the fact that there's a very high chance that most word of mouth conversations that are happening between parents that love your school and their friends are not becoming actual prospects and actually families who enroll within your school? Well, the first step is quite simple. You first have to articulate who your school is for, what categories it's for. If it's a virtual school, do you call it virtual, or do you call it online? Once you have the category, you have to define who is this type of school for. Do you want to communicate it based on the kind of child that thrives? Perhaps it's children who are anxious, disengaged, and who once loved learning and no longer do. Or is it children who maybe are leaning towards specific crafts or fields? Maybe it's kids who would really love to do years of math in a couple of months. Or it's a little bit different, where you're not thinking about this child, but you're thinking about families. Maybe you're thinking about families of expats who really need a lot of flexibility. You first have the category, and then you have who it is for, and then you just have to articulate at least the kind of outcome that most people love the most within your school. Maybe it is the fact, like a school like the Socratic experience, that a lot of people just love that their kids start loving to learn again. They become autodidacts because they're no longer being lectured at, but engaging in Socratic conversations that develop the ways in which they think about themselves, the world, and what they want to do with their lives. What's important here is that you need to define this. It doesn't really matter the word you use as of right now, because most of the times schools are not really thinking about the kind of referral sentence that they can send out to parents so that they describe their school. So if you just have what you are, who you're for, and why it matters, or the kind of outcome that they can expect, you are going to be way ahead of the competition. The second thing that I recommend you to do is to actually give this sentence to families, and there are all sorts of ways that you can do this. Maybe you have an incentive program by which, let's say your tuition is $10,000, and maybe it makes sense based on your customer acquisition costs to give families $1,000 for every person they refer. Maybe you lean a little bit into reciprocity and you give $500 to the family that refers and $500 to the family who's about to enter. Or maybe you just don't have an incentive program at all, and all you do is just ask people. And the ask is simply being like, hey, if you want to ever refer, here are some benefits you get, or here are some of the reasons why you might care about this. Here's some of the reasons why it might be important for our mission. The message is really determined by the kind of people that you have within your school, and then you just send them the sentence. Again, you can complicate this as much as you want. I have seen schools that have very comprehensive incentive programs for anyone who refers. I've seen them use pitch decks, maybe even Google Docs with a bunch of stories of children and being like, hey, if you only have 5 seconds, here's the one sentence. But if they want to hear more, here, you can copy paste all of this. You can make this as complex as you want, but the most important thing to remember is that most of the word of mouth conversations that are happening are not turning into customers. So it's better to have something, which in this case is going to be the one sentence that you're going to work in the first stage. And then it's going to be the second thing, which is just send it to people in some way that you think it's going to be helpful. And now they finally know how to describe you because they have the materials to do so. So now you have solved the most important thing out of this. Now, if Maria or any other parent who loves you wants to describe you, they have this one sentence or this set of materials by which they could somewhat accurately describe what you offer, who you're for, and the kind of families who would thrive in your environment. What's going to happen after this is that people will have their attention, piqued. They want to know more about you. And of course, Maria is not a salesperson who they're not going to reach out to her. You're going to reach out to you. The third step that you want to do, if you want to have word of mouth as a consistent referral channel, is to make sure that all the public-facing materials that you have about your company are as clear as possible. In previous videos, I've talked about this school that wasn't attracting the right families. And we had all sorts of conversations. They had an incredible team, incredible track record, incredible pedagogical basis. And what turned out to be happening was simply that their website didn't mention that they were a school. In some other cases, you might not be in that extent, and it might be the case that maybe your website is up to date and incredibly articulated, but then your ads don't really match. The message you're using on your ads are creating some kind of expectation for something that is not seen within the website. So in this case, maybe both things are clear, but in interaction, your materials don't match each other. You have to look across all your landing pages, or your pitch decks, all your ads, all your content, that same clarity that you're trying to communicate to your team, but also to these parents who could refer you, it's maintained. Rest assured that if you do these two things, on the first hand, you give parents the kind of materials by which they could accurately explain your school. And on the other hand, you have public-facing materials by which people could learn more about your school, and on top of that, doing it accurately, and in a story that clearly connects across platforms, but also to what your parent said, you're gonna get more referrals from a lot of those families that you thought you were getting a lot of referrals from already. More importantly, you might increase the amount of referrals that you're getting per customer, and who wouldn't want that?